Today we are going to ask and answer the question, is all Scripture really useful for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, as Paul says in 2 Timothy 3:16. This is precisely what that verse says. It goes even one step further, though, by saying that all Scripture is God-breathed, which means that while humans may have physically written down all of Scripture, God himself is the one who is the author rather than the humans. So that's the direct statement of 2 Timothy 3:16. But is that actually true? Is all Scripture really useful, as 2 Timothy 3:16 says? I don't know about you, but I have often struggled when I come across a weird passage. My first inclination is, what on earth is going on here? This seems very out there, very weird. How does this apply to me today? Does it apply today? And this even seems to be something that pastors and even maybe theologians struggle with, in the sense that a lot of Scripture, namely the Old Testament, isn't taught from nearly as much as the New Testament. Some examples of this, well, maybe an illustration of this, is that 75% of the Bible is the Old Testament. A full 3/4 of the Bible is the Old Testament. Yet, maybe only a quarter of sermons, maybe even less than that, are based in the Old Testament. Sure, you'll pull from a verse here and there, but oftentimes it's never based. Like, we don't teach from the Old Testament and pull a few from the New Testament. We can even see this in seminaries. For example, where I'm currently attending, Liberty University, you can get so much more time and study in Greek for the New Testament than you can in Hebrew for the Old Testament. There's like 2 or 3 times the amount of class options that you can take. All of this seems to indicate, even without the direct words saying that the Old Testament is worth less than the New Testament is, so you might not get direct words saying the New Testament is lesser, but the actions seem to indicate that the Old Testament is not as beneficial for us today as the New Testament is. So today, the plan is to address an Old Testament passage to see if Paul is lying in 2 Timothy. After all, when Paul wrote that, the Old Testament was essentially the entire Scripture that he would have been referring to. So we're going to go to the Old Testament, which, one, is already not taught from a whole lot. And second, we're going to go to a minor prophet, which, just a little bit of information on a minor prophet first. We have what are called major and minor prophets in Scripture. That has nothing to do with the content of the prophet. It has everything to do with the length. So when we say that we have a major prophet, we're saying that because of how long the book is. So the examples would be Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah, who have 50 plus chapters in their books. And then the minor prophets, again, are just shorter. So Obadiah is the shortest one, which is just 1 chapter, and I believe Zechariah is the longest one at 14 chapters. Minor prophets and major prophets is a length of book thing, not the content itself. So, Old Testament, minor prophet, and the minor prophets are taught from significantly less than much of the Old Testament is. The Old Testament isn't taught much, but then the minor prophets are taught even less in general. And then finally, I am picking a very weird minor prophet. We're going to look at Hosea. And if you've ever read Hosea, you will recognize that for sure the first chapter of Hosea it's a doozy. It's a strange one. Fun fact about Hosea, I don't think, now this could be a memory thing. I'm not known for having the best memory, but I don't remember or recall a single sermon that I've heard ever taught on the book of Hosea, which is really kind of unfortunate. It's a great book. It is a strange book. It's not the easiest one to read and understand for today, but it is a fantastic book. So that's what we're going to do. Old Testament, Minor Prophet, Hosea. So how we're going to do this is we're going to go through the entire first chapter. We're going to go from Hosea 1 to 11, Hosea 1 through 11. And I will give some commentary along the way, and then we'll see if we can find some application points from this. So to start with, let's begin reading. The word of Yahweh that came to Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Okay, pause. I don't know if you noticed, but I said Yahweh rather than the Lord. Most translations have all caps Lord in place of what we call the divine name, or the personal name of God, which is Yahweh. And I personally am not comfortable with the translation of into the Lord, because it's the most commonly used word in the entire Bible. If you discount things like he, the, you, the words that don't really have any meaning on their own, if you discount all of those, Yahweh is the most used word in the Bible, which means it's incredibly important, and I don't want to translate something to something else when God seems to be saying, no, this is my name, that's how I'm to be called. So whenever I see the Lord in all caps like that, I always translate it to Yahweh. I don't have time to actually get into that. I will link, I've done a blog post on that. I will link that in the description below, so you can go and check that out if you want. But yeah, just so you're aware, anytime I hit the Lord, I will translate Yahweh. Okay, let's continue. When Yahweh first spoke through Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea, "Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking Yahweh." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So we need to pause here. First off, what on earth does it mean that Hosea was to take a wife of whoredom? And two, why? We need to answer those questions. So the first question, what is a wife of whoredom, is pretty simple. It can be one of three things. It could be a woman who is a prostitute, and some translations do say that she was a prostitute. We don't have any empirical evidence of that, so we just don't know. So she could be a prostitute who is paid to have sex. She could also be a woman who was married and cheated and then was divorced. Or she could be an unmarried woman who is just known to sleep around a lot. Any one of those three options really fits the context. It doesn't really matter. The third one is the least likely because of how the comparison is happening here between God and Israel, and between Hosea and the woman. We'll see that here in a little bit. So really the first two are the most likely. Okay, let's continue on reading. And Yahweh said to him, "Call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel. And I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel, and on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." So the important thing that we really need to look at here is how God is commanding Hosea to name his children. So his children's name are to be symbolic of what God is going to do in the future, or even very soon. Still the future, but very soon after, which is important to look at These are symbolic names. However, there's no indication that they are not their literal names that they were given. She conceived again and bore a daughter, and Yahweh said to him, "Call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel, to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by Yahweh their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen." Basically, God himself is going to save them, not anybody else. When she had weaned No Mercy, she conceived and bore a son, and Yahweh said, "Call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, it shall be said to them, Children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head. And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel." Okay, so before we go on any further, I want to go and discuss those two last names that we just got. No Mercy and Not My People. The first thing that I want to point out, No Mercy. Depending on your translation, you might see Not Loved or Not Beloved or something up that line. So the words are Lo Ruchama, which means, which can mean either no mercy, no compassion, or not loved. Though really, Ruchama is a verb, and so it would be something more along the lines of has not received mercy, has not received compassion, or has not received love. However, as translation works, and this works in every language, words that do have multiple possible meanings, you cannot translate them all in that way. So you have to pick, based on context, which meaning is more accurate to the context. So the reason why we have different translations, so mercy is the more common translation of this word, or compassion. But the Hebrews, when they translated into Greek in the Septuagint, translated it as beloved. That's what we get, we'll see later, that's what we get in the New Testament. And so that's kind of a main second way of translating it. ESV uses no mercy. I personally believe that no mercy or no compassion is probably more faithful to the meaning of what God was portraying. However, all three of them, even not loved, really fits the context in that sense. The reason why I believe it's no mercy or no compassion is because there are Hebrew words that just mean love. So, for example, had God said, "Name her Lo Ahava," it would be not loved, like literally, or has not received love. And that's just the way that it would go. And so that would be a very clear way for God to say she was not loved, or she is not loved, or has not received love. That's not what God did. He used a word that doesn't typically mean love, and it typically means mercy or compassion. And so I personally believe that no mercy or no compassion are the better translations of that word, of that phrase, actually. Anyway, moving on from there. What I find exceedingly interesting about these two names, and it does happen in other places in Scripture, but not as much as you would think. No mercy and not my people are not names. They are actual phrases. If you look at somebody's name like Isaiah, for example, his name it's all like one word. There's no spaces or anything like that. And it means Yahweh's salvation. That's what it means, or Yahweh saves. These are literally phrases. So Lo Ruchama, a literal translation of that is she has not received mercy, or she has not received compassion. And lo, me, not my people, is literally lo, no or not, me, people with a personal possessive, so my people. Which, can you imagine having those names? Like, you literally grow up, you go to school, you live life, it's on your passport, it's on your birth certificate, it's on everything that your name is No Mercy or Not My People. I just think that would suck. I mean, just thinking, like, kids are pretty mean to begin with, so, like, I can imagine just how much bullying would happen with somebody with that name. It's just a very interesting thing for me to think about. So I don't actually recommend anybody name their kids any of those things, unless God specifically commands you to do so. Then go ahead, and actually you better do it because God commanded you to do it. That said, I actually would really like either myself or somebody who's watching this to name a pet No Mercy or Not My People, because I think it would be really funny to when people are like, what, why, where did you get that? And you say, well, it's biblical. I found it in scripture, and let me show you where. It's in this weird book called Hosea, where God commands his kids to be named No Mercy and Not My People. I don't know. I think it would just be really funny and could be a good way of pointing people to an awesome book in the Old Testament. Anyway, so we've gone through Hosea 1, and I mean, you're probably thinking what I thought the first time I read this is, what on earth is going on in this thing? Like, why would God command Hosea to marry a woman who was already unfaithful, which really means that you can expect her to continue to be unfaithful? He gives us, like, right in there why, and it's because it's a symbol. So Hosea's marriage between a wife of whoredom and himself is symbolic of the marriage between God and Israel. He actually says it right here. So, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking Yahweh. That's literally the connection. So it's Hosea marries an unfaithful wife in the same way that Yahweh, God, married an unfaithful wife, being Israel. Now I guess we can understand why it's saying what it's saying. But how is it relevant today? How is it relevant today? And there's actually a lot of people who would argue, to some degree at least, that it's not relevant for us today, because it was Old Covenant, Old Testament, and we're under the New Covenant and the New Testament. And so it doesn't apply to us today, at least in the same way as it did to the Israelites. And that's also the thing, is it was to the Israelites, it wasn't to Christians. It was written to the Israelites. That said, while it is true that it's Old Testament, Old Covenant, written to the Israelites primarily, it couldn't be further from the truth that it's not valuable to us today. While there are actually quite a few application points that we can pull from this, I only want to look at two. So the first is that the New Testament uses Hosea actually a fair amount. There's only 14, by the way, there's a F-18 flying out. So if you hear rumbling, that's what it is. The New Testament uses Hosea a fair amount. So Hosea has 14 chapters, but it is used 11 times in the New Testament, which is actually quite significant. It's a lot of uses for a pretty small book. But not only is the book of Hosea used, this first chapter is used. And it's used in a very interesting way. Paul actually uses Hosea to talk about how the Christians of today and of his time are actually now called to be God's people, along with Israel. So in speaking of the Gentiles, or to the Gentiles, which are non-Jewish people, Paul says this in Romans 9:24 through 26. As indeed he says in Hosea, those who were not my people I will call my people, and her who is not beloved I will call beloved. And in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. Thus, we who are not Jews are now, Paul is saying, Hosea is saying that we can be called children of God, beloved, and sons of the living God. An important thing to consider, though, about that is that we are only able to use those titles if we follow Jesus. If we don't follow Jesus, none of those apply to us. We are not God's people, we are not beloved, and we are not sons of the living God. So it's important for us to remember, like, yes, Paul says the Old Testament, Hosea, is talking about non-Jews here, in that we are able to come into those things and be called those things. We do need to believe in the living God and follow the living God in order to receive those titles for us. And the second area of application that we're going to look at is that we, as Christians, are called the bride of Christ, which sounds very similar to the wording in the phraseology in Hosea. Because it is. So in the Old Testament, one of the main pictures that God uses between him and Israel and their relationship is that of a marriage. It's the same thing in the New Testament. We, as Christians, are married to God. We are the bride of Christ. This means that we can also commit adultery against God by following other gods. This is a huge warning for us. So this actually fits the teaching, the reproof, correction, and training in righteousness of 2 Timothy 3:16, in that it's a warning and it's a teaching of how we should behave, how we should follow God, and what our priorities should be. So Jesus tells us basically anything that we put above God is what is our God, essentially. So we can't love, he says it this way, we can't love both God and money. For you will love one and hate the other, hate the one and love the other. And that's basically that when I or you love money, or when I or you love our respective spouses more than we love God, then we are committing adultery against God with money or our spouse or our car or whatever the deal is. Basically, we must not follow the same path that the Israelites followed, and that's what Hosea is warning us about, because it was this tendency to commit adultery against God that caused the Israelites to be called ones who have not received mercy and not my people. But there's also another portion to this, and one of them is that there's more to false gods today than we typically give credit for. So one of the things, when you look in the Bible, typically it's actual false gods. We have the Greek gods, the Roman gods, Baal and Molech, and all the other gods that were surrounding Israel. They were the ones that Israel was following after. And we don't see that as much today. And so there's a tendency to think that we don't have to worry about actual gods. It's always like, well, don't make money your god. Don't make your car your god. Don't make your wife your god, which are valid points, because if you're putting those things above God, yes, you have made them your God, and that is adultery against God. But I think we need to be careful. There is more chances today than we realize about following actual false gods. I'll just give you a quick example. Mormonism is a belief system in a false God, false Jesus, false gospel. They look very similar to Christianity, but when you actually dig into what they teach and what they believe, it's not the God of the Bible. It's not the Jesus of the Bible, and it's not the gospel of the Bible. And so they're here. They're on our doorstep. They are evangelizing. They're trying to get people to become Mormons. And so if you have a conversation with a Mormon, you do need to be careful that you don't fall into the trap of following their God. And that's just one example. There are others, and we do need to be careful just in general of that. Essentially, the big thing that we need to be aware of is that anything, whether it has the title of God or it has some other title, whether it's monetary things, it doesn't matter. Whatever the deal is, if it is in a position in our lives that we pursue it more than God, we love it more than God, it is adultery. And we are sinning against God in that way. And we must not do that. So hopefully, while we didn't unpack everything in here, we didn't apply everything in here, hopefully this teaching was able to give you a good idea of ways that we can take weird and obscure passages of Scripture, ones that most people don't teach from, but most people don't read, and be able to actually see the value in it, that it is useful for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. That's my desire that this teaching helped you do. And if you enjoyed this teaching, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. And until the next video, have a good one.